It is called Prioritizing Diversity in Boards in Leadership. Despite the abundance of research that confirms how diverse teams foster increased innovation, diversifying an organization's leadership structure often takes a back seat to other priorities. So this session features leaders from various organizations doing their due diligence to prioritize diversity at all levels of leadership, with an emphasis on board structure and development. Today, we're joined by Kim Barker-Lee of IGT, Rob Conboy of Glavel, Oscar Mejias of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and we're joined by Melissa Husband, the Deputy Secretary of State for Rhode Island, to moderate the discussion. Thank you all so much for joining us today on this Thursday in August. And Melissa, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Avi. Just quickly in regards to what I do as the Deputy Secretary of State, my role is to lead the operations and strategic direction of the Rhode Island Department of State through the work of its divisions, which includes elections, business services, and archives, as well as HR and finance. I am very excited to be here and to be a part of this conversation. We have a phenomenal panel, and I'm hoping that you all ask them questions to be able to gauge and get a good sense of what diversity looks like when it comes to leadership, and tools that you can use to implement your goals of diversifying your leadership in your companies. So with that said, I'm going to pass it off to Kim to introduce herself and give a brief background.
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for having me. My name is Kim Barker-Lee. I am the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion at IGT. We are headquartered, we have operating headquarters here in Providence, Rhode Island. And for those of you who are joining from Rhode Island, you probably knew us as GTEC. We are now IGT. And to give you a little bit of background on who we are the global leader in gaming solutions for lotteries, casinos, and also in the digital gaming space. We have over 12,000 employees in over 100 countries. And so having a global discussion today fits right into my wheelhouse in terms of how I think about diversity and inclusion. To give you a little bit of a kind of practical sense of what we do as a company, if you go into any convenience store and you purchase a lottery ticket, more than likely you are purchasing on equipment that we've manufactured and created. The software and technology systems that power that purchase were created by IGTers, and the paper that your tickets are printed on. Provided by IGT, and the ideation with our customers to create those games that entertain responsibly, created by IGT. And so we are generally known as business to business, which means that we support lotteries and casinos across the globe. My role at the company is to create an Office of Diversity and Inclusion, which was created in 2018, and to lead our company in terms of creating a more inclusive environment, but then also to address diversity at every level of the company, from the board to our employees, and also linking that to our business, which includes our customers and players. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim, for that. Rob, can you please introduce yourself and give a brief background?
I can. Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, my name is Rob Conboy, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Glavel. We're headquartered up here in Vermont, and Glavel is a product that's made from recycled glass. It's a highly valued building material that Europeans have been making for about 20 years. So it's a tried and true product that we are looking to develop manufacturing centers all throughout North America to take our municipal waste glass and turn it into a high valued building material. Early on, we decided to take our own spin on the product and commit to producing the product using 100% renewable energy. The result is a building material that not only is made from recycled glass, but now has an incredibly low embodied carbon footprint in the product itself. We want to be very intentional about who and what Glavel is going to be. We are a startup. We are looking to create our manufacturing facilities regionally, and want to have a deep and important positive impact in the communities that we operate. So very early on, we decided to commit to a very diverse organization from top to bottom, rather than that being kind of an afterthought once we get up and running or doing well, that we wanted to commit to a diverse organization from the get-go. So thanks so much for having us be part of this panel.
Thank you, Rob. Oscar, can you please give a quick introduction and brief background?
Thank you, Melissa. First of all, I want to say thank you of this marvelous team for inviting me to be part of this conversation, and it's an honor for me to be with so professional and diverse panel. My name is Oscar Mejias. I am the president of the Rhode Island Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. As a professional, I am computer engineer with a specialization in project management. But since I arrived to the United States, I developed a love for business. So I've been in business for more than 16 years. I have created some companies. And in 2016, learning about the needs of the Latino community with a group of community leaders, we founded the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. It has been a very intense time from 2016 to now. But we are really, really proud to have an organization that represents, promote, and help the Latino business community. And we are trying to provide them with the tools needed to grow and have a better quality in services and products. This year has been very, very particularly intense. And we have been working really, really hard to help our business to survive, to get access to funds, but most important, to learn how to face the challenges in looking at this new normality, the new reality. And we are promoting something like, don't think anymore in go back, in recovery. We are trying to promote the redesign, rethink our business and change the business model, which is very important because the future, it will be totally different. Our present is different, so the future will be totally different. We have been working. I'm very proud to see how our community is growing and is doing better every day.
Thank you so much, Oscar, for that. For those of you that are just joining us, I want to just remind you or let you know that we will leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. So if you can please post your questions in the chat, that would be really great. We would love to be able to answer your questions. So I'm going to jump in for our first general question for the panelists. Diversity is a word that I think for the most part, there's a level of understanding of what it means. Diversity is ensuring that there are multiple voices, different perspectives, different backgrounds at the table. But what does that actually look like in today's workplace? And the second part to that question is, what value does diversity bring to a company or an organization? Can we start with Kim on that question?
Oh, absolutely. I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, diversity is, we describe it as, who's at the table, the various identities that we as individuals bring, but then how they connect to each other to think about our identity as a company. At IGT, we go to a well-known phrase, which is diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, right? And so it's about who is coming to the table with different perspectives. We as a global company have to think about that on a number of levels because diversity looks very different on a global scale. Where you sit in terms of dimensions of diversity, we have to have a very broad definition of diversity that does not focus only on those primary elements, things that we describe as the things about yourself that you most likely cannot change, race, ethnicity, and gender. And so those are, the need to kind of think about diversity from the perspective of bringing different voices is important, but I also think representation does matter. And what we're seeing in terms of the research on the importance of diversity is that having greater diversity in your organization at the top, but then also throughout the organization on your teams has an impact on profitability, productivity. It has an impact on the sense of culture that an organization has. It has an impact on your customers' connection to who you are as a company. It has an impact on your ability to deliver for customers. It has an impact on your connection to communities. And so diversity really needs to be seen in terms of the overall impact that your people have within your organization on your ability to meet the needs of your customers, of your communities, and importantly, of the people in your organization.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim. Rob, would you like to jump in on that question?
Yeah, absolutely. And to echo sort of everything that Kim pointed out in terms of how we look at diversity is very similar. And I think being a startup, as we look at the type of culture that we want to create, it also is a commitment to creating a safe space for people to flourish. That if we do our job and make it known the type of culture that we're building at Glavel is inclusive in all its forms, in terms of race, ethnicity, gender and gender identity, that oftentimes folks might feel like they were overlooked or passed over, and they have an amazing amount of talent that is not being leveraged in their current organizations. That they, by creating a space and a culture that celebrates diversity, we really feel that we're gonna have a culture that allows people to really flourish and be the best they can be.
Thank you. Oscar?
Yeah, thank you. When I talk about diversity, I usually try to go to the real concept of diversity. I feel that additional to the skin color, to the gender, and the things, it's more important to understand what is the concept of diversity. From my point of view, is to embrace the cultural difference, the difference between the people. It doesn't matter skin color or gender, but everyone has their own values that for an organization is really, really important. When the leadership in corporations understand the value of that cultural differences, that brings a better reputation for an organization. And most important for the leadership, it brings tools to promote the engagement of the employees, to bring richness to the organizational climate. So I think that is really, really important, and it's more than just being compliant with some regulation on some mood around the environment, but it's more to think about how many benefits and in which way they can benefit the organizational culture.
Mm-hmm. I think Rob and Kim and Oscar, you touched on it a little bit as well. You all talked about the organization's culture. And the organization's culture is vital to the success of the business, but it's also important for the morale of the organization and the staff. So as we talk about culture and we think about the culture of the business or the organization, how do you get to a place where diversity runs all the way through the organization and where it's sustainable? Because sometimes it really is based on the leadership for the now and then, for the now and there and the present. Like, how do you build diversity into the culture where it stays and it outlives and outlasts the people that kind of come and go throughout the life of the organization or the business? Any takers?
Yeah, I can start. I think where we are in the cycle of the business as we're talking to specific investor groups, we have one that we're working with here in Vermont, the Flex Capital Fund, and early on in discussions with Janice St. Ange, the executive director, they mandate diversity and inclusion on boards and a commitment to diversity and inclusion as part of who they invest in. And what we're hoping is that it's a bit of a domino effect, that having the intention and the goal to have that kind of diversity opens us up to networks and ecosystems that will allow us to attract diverse board members and investors. So many of the investor groups that we're talking to are impact investors and often have social justice as a broad rubric, that they're looking for entities that are committed to inclusion and social justice missions. I think another group that we're working with here in Vermont that we're very, very proud to be partnered with is New Frameworks. And Helm is a consultancy that they work with, that being very intentional in the way that you draft job descriptions, the way that you put out job postings, and very early on, the way that you describe your culture is another way, sort of from the bottom up, that you can arrive at this constant reaffirmation to your commitment.
And I think that commitment to driving an inclusive culture is always a work in progress. And when we think about culture, we think about really, it's how a company thinks and acts. Culture is both formal, culture is informal. Culture is about the unwritten rules within your organization. And what diversity and inclusion should have as its goals is to kind of equalize or provide equity for those rules of access for everyone in the organization. And that takes, I like to describe it as a caliper approach. It really takes commitment from the top, and it takes engagement from our employees to realize those benefits. And so with that caliper approach, the diversity piece is something that leadership can be very instrumental in doing. And sometimes that's making a decision. It's about being intentional. It is saying that we really must do a better job of looking for people to be on our board, to look for leadership in different places, and to develop within our organizations that pipeline for leadership, so that we're not missing out on the richness of diverse experiences and perspectives as we are problem solving, as we are creating, as we are communicating with our customers, and as we are setting an example for what inclusion really means for the marketplace and our employees. But it also takes sustained commitment to building opportunities for employees to engage, to really share pieces of themselves that in many organizations, people of color, our colleagues who are LGBTQ+, actually leave at home. And so how can you come to work and realize the benefit of being an employee at a company, sharing your talents, sharing your goals and your aspirations, and asking for support to do that if a culture doesn't support you bringing more of who you are to work. And so some of the ways that we do that at IGT in our initial stages was to pay close attention to creating diversity and inclusion groups, which are, many people know them as employee resource groups or employee business resource groups. And really what they are employee-led organizations that are formed around some dimension of diversity. And for IGT, we started with our Women's Inclusion Network. We now have chapters across the globe, including chapters in Italy and chapters in Latin America. We have Pride with IGT for our LGBTQ+ employees and allies. We have super abilities for our employees with abilities and those who support those with super abilities. We have military veterans, and we also have a group for employees who are greater than 50. And shortly we will be launching our first group for employees of African descent globally. And the reason why those are really important is that they set the stage for how employees can be more engaged and how companies can show up when diversity is in the door. It is very easy to ignore diversity in your organization. by not providing platforms and opportunities for employees to engage. Inclusion is the answer to that. Inclusion says it is okay for us to embrace diversity in positive ways, because at the end of the day, it contributes to a better culture for our company. And that is a work in progress. I mean, there's no such thing as we're inclusive and we're done.
Right.
As people and as markets change, as your business challenges change, how you engage people will really depend upon how inclusive of an organization you are. And that's not the same as diversity. And so as more companies start thinking about embracing diversity, you cannot have it as a model without inclusion and without a focus on culture for it to truly be successful. One of the things that we're challenged with, I think, when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, is that sometimes these concepts seem soft, and they don't seem tied to business and strategy. Successful organizations embed them in two ways. They embed them by calling them out and making them part of your leadership profile. Are we evaluating our leaders on how inclusive of a leader they are? Do their people view them as supportive of diversity and inclusion? And if the answer is no, then we need to do some education and training, and we need to do some problem solving around that. But then the other way to embed diversity, the importance of diversity and inclusion, is really through what we call inclusive systems. So that, as you mentioned, Melissa, the commitment to diversity and inclusion outlives whoever the leader is. I happen to be the leader of diversity and inclusion in my organization. It's not my personal legacy that I'm concerned about. It's about systemic and institutional change within my company so that it becomes part of our culture. It is embedded in our DNA, and its absence would be sorely missed if not sustained at the level that we are now, or actually above. And so looking at your talent acquisition processes, how do we evaluate performance within your organization? How do we respect and engage our customers? Are we ignoring customers who are, quote, diverse? Are we ignoring opportunities to embrace the evolving demographics of the world that we live in? And if we are, we need to change our systems so that they become reflexive in terms of how an organization positions itself for business success and also engaging its people.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Kim. That was amazing. Would you like to hone in, Oscar?
Well, has been very well said by Kim and Rob. That was a great answer. And I just want to highlight that with the dynamic of the global economy, a company who try to ignore or living in the side diversity and inclusion, they are destined to be isolated in front of a market that change every day and the market is asking for diversity. From the point of view of the customers, the companies and corporations cannot be just concentrated and making those differences, or ignoring those differences, I'm sorry. They need to understand the market. They need to understand how the world is changing, how the needs are changing. So from the point of view of the economic progress of the organization, of the corporation, is necessary to understand, well, what is diversity. And inside, as Kim said, inside the organization, to ignore the diversity and inclusion is to put a roof over their head. They won't grow more if they don't understand, if they don't embrace, if they don't get a commitment to incorporate in a real way that diversity. It's not a number, it's not one person in a board of 15 people, just one diverse people of color or of different culture. It's more to bring inside and make that people part of the organizational culture. From the point of view of the conflict resolution, as I said before, the employees' engagement, and the way to look at other solutions is something that will be more necessary from the time is evolving, the economy is evolving, so the organization needs to evolve too in terms of diversity and inclusion.
Thank you, Oscar. This conversation is definitely bringing up some really great nuggets, right? That I would love to dig a little bit deeper into. And this question is going to be to Rob. So as someone who is a founder of a company, how do you, from based on your perspective, how do you convince corporations that diversity and inclusion is important, one, and two, how do you get them to understand and recognize that diversity can indeed create a competitive advantage?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as we sort of look at the world around us and realize the importance of the changing climate and culture, that that it's becoming very clear the echo chamber doesn't work anymore. You can't have organizations of all like-minded individuals that sort of feed back into themselves exactly what they want to hear, that the diversity of thought, experience, ways of doing things, personal stories and backgrounds that they bring to the organization are critically important. And that is an invisible competitive advantage. So if you are creating an organization that is that echo chamber, you are missing out on the richness of experience and personal histories that employees can bring. And the sort of collision of ideas. So creating a culture that embraces different ideas and the voicing of different ideas in constructive ways is a huge competitive advantage, because it may not be two right ideas. You know, it's the convergence of taking different viewpoints and being able to lever them to solve problems. So I think there is a component of this that will be blind to our competitors, the way that our culture will manifest, and the benefits of which that will reap by virtue of really leaning into diversity of ideas and concepts.
Hmm. Would anyone else like to weigh in on that question before I move on to the next?
Sure. I think you need to understand, you know, the nature of not just who your customers are, but who are the universe of people who will at some point, if not purchase your products, be the beneficiary of or touch them. And if that's not the business case enough, I don't know what is, because at the end of the world, we live in a diverse world. We live in a multicultural world. We live in a world where people speak different languages. We live in a world where people can take, you know, one event and have 15 different perspectives on its impact. And I think that thinking about, you know, your potential customer base, your potential neighbors, you know, where you might put your brick and mortar building, I think lays the biggest, you know, business case for diversity, because it's just the world that we live in. And if our people don't reflect that, then we're missing out on, I think, perspective. And, you know, if the motivation is financial, then we're missing out on some customers out there. And I think that that's an important, you know, component to laying the business case for why diversity is important and how inclusion can help you leverage it in ways that can really be quite impactful for organizations.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree. And that also leads to my next question. I think it's great to know that so many companies and businesses and organizations have finally seen the light that diversity and inclusion is important. And not only important, it's absolutely necessary to the success of the business that they do. But how do they get access to diverse candidates? Where do they look and seek? Because the reality is that many of us, self-included, has tried to be a part of corporate boards, but you either don't know the people that you need to know to be appointed to boards, you don't know what the process is. So for those who are seeking to be on boards in leadership to diversify, and for those who are looking, what are some of the tools for recruitment in order to accomplish that goal?
Well, as we said before, I think that is not how to force or how to put pressure in organization to open to diversity. Is their responsibility to understand that is a need and it's a key component in the future of the business. So if the organization doesn't have the intention, the real intention to reach diversity, they never will do, whatever tools they use. The organization needs to have a real intention to incorporate diversity in their board. So when you have an interview, it's not just about technical skill of the candidate. It's about in which way that people could bring their culture to incorporate into the organization. But again, if there is no intentionality, whatever tool they use, it would be impossible. We could talk about, usually there is no candidate in, let's say, for example, in the Latino community, and some corporations say, I cannot find the right person. I would like to incorporate Latinos in my organization. But then the question is, how do you try to reach them? Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I'm using this communication channel. Most of the Latino doesn't use that communication channel. So you will never find them if you don't look or if you don't communicate in the right way, in the right target. So tools like communication, real communication strategies, real intentionality when you want to incorporate that diversity. It's not just, as I said at the beginning, it's not just to be compliant with a regulation. Or in California, there are regulations that force to incorporate diversity in the board. I need to be compliant with that. It's not that the point. It doesn't work. They need to have the real intention to bring them on board and make them part of the decision and make them part of the evolution of the company. So yes, there are several tools, but it's necessary to have a real intention and to use the real and effective communication strategy to reach all those talents that are outside, that are diverse, and they are just looking for one opportunity to make great things and great changes in corporations.
Thank you, Oscar.
Yeah, I would say that we're hopeful that the type of investors that we're bringing that are asking us to have this kind of diversity will then, create the space and make introductions for the diversity that we're looking at the sort of corporate governance level. We're also hopeful that as we reach out to organizations like New American organizations here in Vermont and Vermont Works for Women and an organization that helps place formerly incarcerated individuals, breaking the cycle of incarceration, that those partnerships then will not only allow us to have a culture of inclusion within the organization, but their boards would also potentially be fertile ground for other introductions to help us at the corporate level.
And I think board diversity is very similar to some of the challenges with diversity in our organizations. We don't need diversity for diversity's sake. It's not just about numbers. It's about ensuring that we recognize that we have technically competent, high-performing women of color, people of color, LGBTQ people in their disciplines. And ultimately, boards have to be well-rounded in a number of instances. And having a technical expert who happens to be a person of color, who happens to be from some other underrepresented group, they are not mutually exclusive. And as Oscar has been using the term intentionality quite a bit, it takes intentionality in recognizing that and looking to recruiters or different resources to say, we want this and, not this or, we want right. This and it exists out there. The other thing I will say is something that we don't talk about, and I think Rob kind of touched on it, which is lots of people, recognize diversity as an asset, but not very many people help you get there, right? And so one of the things that, in looking at board membership is, I think those of us who are from underrepresented groups who are in corporate America today who might have an aspiration to sit on a board, now's the time to start preparing for that. Now's the time to start thinking about your own personal profile and how you want to round out your professional development. If at a stage in life that becomes important, having access to that information. And there are some organizations out there that are really dedicated to creating pipelines for board membership that represent different dimensions of diversity. And so, we can probably think about some of those resources, but that's the other thing, is to, in your own personal career and personal profile, if that is an aspiration, let's think about programs, training programs, engagement, executive leadership programs that can help you get there, so that the pipeline, not having people who are qualified issue goes away, because I've done some extra work here to make sure that I could be included in that in that candidate pool for a board membership. And so I think that's the other thing, is for us to think about it as a professional development opportunity and to seize the moment to prepare for that, that right opportunity when it comes along.
I agree, Kim. I think leadership development is definitely vital to help in assisting folks prepare and get ready to be on corporate boards. I'm gonna ask a question that might be a little uncomfortable here, but as somebody who's been on a board where I was the only person of color on the board, my opinion 9 times out of 10 was the one man out. My opinion was not shared. I represented a large group of communities that did not have a voice at that particular table. And it was very difficult for me to be able to push against the opinions of the folks around the table and feel that I was really doing my job as the person bringing to the table a different perspective. It was very difficult for me. So the question is, or it's a layered type of a question. The question is, when folks come to the table to ensure diversity, how do you make sure that their voice matters? And to make sure that what they have to offer, as Kim said, you don't just want someone who's there for diversity's sake. You're looking for folks who, yes, serve that population, but also bring a very specific or multiple skill sets. So how do you do that? How do you ensure that their voice is heard, it matters, and it's a part of that decision-making process? And then on top of that, how do you make sure that that person is not necessarily feeling tokenized? Because the reality is that some companies and businesses will put someone of color, LGBTQ, etc., on a board simply to say, we are diverse, and therefore tokenizing the person in that space. So what are some of the suggestions you could give to folks looking to ensure that they're being effective in diversity when they bring people to the table?
Well, I think that is not, there is a great question. It's a complicated question because I feel that there is no right answer. Es decir, a specific answer. Everything depends, and we have mentioned that before, depends on the commitment that the organization has in front of the community. If the person who is part of the board is just to say that they are in compliance, it will be very, very difficult. So this professional needs to be very creative, need to be fighting all the time, and that put more pressure in the position. But I think there is no recipe that we could say, oh, follow this step by step and everything will change. It's a daily fight that we should face, and we need to find and be creative, try to find ways to make our voice be heard by the rest of the board. I always say that it's funny, where 14 always the votes are 14 against 1 in most of the cases when there is no right representation of diversity. But it's a shame on the company that's because they are showing that they don't have a real commitment with the community that person represents. So maybe Rob or King have better idea, but for me, it's not a recipe. It keeps, and it's our responsibility, keep fighting and keep trying and keep trying to find ways to be more creative or I don't know, find the right way how to keep pushing until the organization understand what really means the commitment with the community.
Thank you, Oscar.
I guess I would say that we're in this unique position as a startup where we don't have a board. So we're not looking to change the makeup of an existing governing structure, but rather as we launch our board, we have to do that with the diversity already built in. So I think it's a call to action to other entrepreneurs that are in a similar situation that you can't wait to do this. It can't be, oh, we'll get to it later. We're just going to go with the group of peers that we think can either give us access to capital or has industry knowledge that we can lever. It has to be a commitment from the start. So then you're not in the situation of tokenizing. You launch a board that is fully diverse and fully integrated. So I think that's our strategy.
Thank you.
I think you hit on a number of issues. I'm going to take what I consider the personal one first, which is there's an emotional tax associated with being the only wherever you are. If it is on a board, if it is on your team. And, you know, one of the kind of the tax associated with that is ensuring that the various communities and perspectives that you might have intimately understanding of, and you feel this huge, I'm going to say, sense of obligation to elevate. When you are the only, it makes it very difficult, and you have to kind of, I think, do a personal assessment as you are choosing to be that only on a board, to ask, why is that? You know, am I the only person of color on the board? Am I the only woman of color? If that is the case, I want you to dig deeper and find me some company. And then I think it, you know, as we're talking about diversity and inclusion, it's okay to ask people to explain their motivations for seeking diversity. And if it is just to check a box, then okay, we're clear, and then I have a personal assessment to do as to whether or not I view that as an opportunity to do more, because there are people who are dependent on me being in that room to impact them.
Right.
But then I think also, you know, it's okay to say no to opportunities where you feel that there's a disingenuous approach to this. And this is broad. It's not just corporate boards, but not-for-profit boards as well. And sometimes giving up that opportunity is hard, because you really do want to be there to be the voice for communities that you represent. One of the questions that I ask now, even when I go on panels, is, do you have other people of color who will be on the panel? You know, what is the diversity look about the panel? And, you know, Venture Cafe will know that's one of the questions I asked here, because I think it's important that different voices be recognized and that no one is in the position of being the only spokesperson. But sometimes that's just our reality, and it's an opportunity that we just can't give up. You just have to kind of hunker down and realize it might be difficult, you know, but you know, and get your support elsewhere if not on the board. Find allies.
Thank you. We have several questions coming through the chat. I'm going to start with the first question is, how do you measure success as leaders in your companies, ensuring that diversity matters, that it is a priority, that it's baked into the culture? How do you measure that it's actually working? Anyone?
I can, oh, Oscar.
Oscar, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Answer related first, Kim.
Oh, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, this is a great question because it gets quite complex. So the obvious places that you measure are representation. You know, what is our growth and overall representation? But what I like to tell people is that is like an outward measure. There's a lot that you can measure that can get there. You can measure, you know, how well are we doing at attracting diverse candidates to our job opportunities? How well are we doing in promotion rates? How well are we doing in terms of measuring inclusion? This year, we at IGT, we have an annual engagement survey. And we have certain questions that we know hit on whether or not we are an inclusive environment. So we're going to start measuring inclusion. But then the other piece that I really want to talk about, and sometimes this is anecdotal, but it is looking at difficult times that happen in the world that we live in. And we're experiencing that right now, everyone on this call, you know, between responses to COVID-19, navigating our own personal safety, supporting family. We're in very trying times. And for many of us, you know, we were already there. And then the moment came where we watched George Floyd literally die in front of our eyes under the knee of a police officer. And you know, I was sitting at home experiencing my own, you know, reaction to that with my family. And then what I realized is, so was my company. And so, you know, those events started unfolding between Friday and Sunday. And on Monday, my CEO had a statement that he put out that basically said, we stand for racial justice, but more importantly for our employees of our Black employees, employees of African descent. We see your experience may be different than ours.
Mm-hmm.
And we created the space through that week for very open and honest conversations led by our dig for employees of African descent to, for many of them, the very first time at work, to be able to express their own experiences with police incidents. And that happened at work. That didn't happen in our personal circles, that happened at work. And then ultimately what that culminated in, it was a global discussion where, like today, we had employees from Asia, we had employees from Europe, we have had employees from Latin America and the Caribbean and the US listening to those stories from colleagues and engaging in a global conversation about racism and race. I will tell you, when I took this position 2 years ago, I couldn't imagine the day that that would happen. But that's how I measure inclusion. That was my personal day where I said, my organization has really, really matured and they're ready to have this conversation in ways that are authentic. And so you've got the official metrics, and then you have the culture of your organization. How do we think and how do we act when faced with adversity? And those are some of the ways that you measure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that answering that question in general terms, everything will depend about the real intentionality or the real commitment that the company has. If the company or a corporation want to really have social responsibility and create a real impact in the community, then they'll do changes internally that will promote the diversity. Starting with creating a director or a position for a director who will be working concentrated in that, in promote the diversity. It shows a real intention to have a good impact in terms of the community. And they could establish their own metrics in order to at the end of the year or in the time, report success in what they are doing. But really, that depends in every organization and how important for them is to grow in terms of diversity. So they could create their own plans and have everything established if there is a real commitment to impact in a positive way the community. As Kim said, it's not just to have people inside and doing nothing more than that. So it's getting all those talent and be involved in what represent that person in their community and how to help the community through the person who they incorporate as part of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say there's a component of transparency and authenticity for us that, we can sit here and sort of say all these platitudes and things we want to do, but there has to be action behind that. So as we grow, as we start hiring and filling positions with that sort of hockey stick that startups experience, holding ourselves accountable both internally and externally to the level and rigor of how are we reaching out? What is the list of organizations? If there's 10 organizations that would help support diversity in Vermont, are we interacting with all 10 of those? So those are the kinds of metrics that we'll have to hold ourselves accountable as we grow and expand and try to realize this commitment to inclusion.
Thank you, Rob. There are several questions around how to prepare. How do you prepare and position yourself for board and leadership positions? I know Kim touched on it a little bit when you talked about organizational or leadership training. They also asked what's missing on boards. I'm assuming they're talking about. So if in your leadership team, in your boards, what are some of the spaces that need to be filled, and how can our audience prepare to essentially fill those positions or needs on a board or in leadership?
I actually think that kind of depends on the organization and the current composition of a board in a very practical way. Some boards need technology experts, others need CFOs, some may need data privacy. And so, I think maybe after this, I can pull together some resources that I am aware of that are dedicated to really developing that pipeline of what I'm going to say are people who represent different dimensions of diversity who are interested in serving on boards. How do you actually do that? I actually moved to Rhode Island from Illinois, Chicago, and was very active in an organization called Chicago United. And they had as one of their key programs increasing the pipeline for diverse talent and professionals to join boards. And they actually had a very structured program to help you prepare for a not-for-profit or a corporate board. And there are other organizations that exist out there. Women on Boards is another example, and there are a few. And I'll have as a takeaway just to help provide a list that maybe we can give to Tuni and Amy to share at a later point. And to do some, some research around, how do you actually prepare and where you can get support, creating a circle of people who are in that same position for, peer mentorship on board membership. That's another thing. You're on this call today. If you notice the same 3 people are asking the question, go into a side chat and let's have a conversation about it and figure out what we can do together to actually prepare ourselves. So maybe creating that circle of support to help us get there. That's one thing I could think of.
Thank you so much, Kim.
I think that from our point of view as a professional and as a community leader, we need to keep these spaces, conversation spaces open. As Venture Cafe and District Hall are doing this event, we need to promote it, and we need to extend this conversation to different instances, inviting people, inviting members of other boards to this conversation so we can share ideas and we can communicate what are the needs of our communities, and those people start to be part of the conversation, not just keeping us talking between us. We need to start to invite more board members that need to learn, that need to understand, and that need to hear what are our ideas, what are our concerns. So I feel that from our side, as a community leader, we need to keep opening more and more conversation and opening the scope of this conversation to people and to make them understand and learn about what we are talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you, Oscar. Rob?
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of, we're coming from such a place of wanting, and just being so fortunate to be able to be on a board like this, to hear from those that have come before us and have paved the way, and are developing best practices about how to not only start on the right path, but continue on the right path in terms of diversity. So really a call to action to investing the time and the effort of meeting with organizations that are doing it right, because they're out there.
Thank you. We are at time. Thank you all, Kim, Robin, Oscar, for your expertise, for joining us today and giving our audience some really great tools in perspective in regards to diversity and inclusion and what that looks like, how you implement it, and how to measure success. I want to thank you all for being here, and I